Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the slight delay. I'm the one moderating this session. My name is Bisi Omojola. I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. The city of Halifax belongs to um, the city of Halifax is situated in the Mi'kmaq land that belong to the Magma people. And on that note, I want to welcome all of us to this session. It's titled Being Agents of Change for Equity Seeking Groups, and we have three presentations to be handled by three different organizations. And what I'll do is I'll just introduce the next presentation topic, and then I'll leave the presenters to introduce themselves and their organizations. At the end of the third presentation, there will be a chance for question and answers where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of any of the presenters. Thank you. So I'd like to call on um, Ben Bempa and Dagmar Koyi to make the presentation on equity in action, innovation solutions for BIPOC youth homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. I think by way of introduction, I would like to also add Clovis Grant from 360 Degree Hits. He's also a co-presenter for this particular presentation. Yeah, as was mentioned, my name is Ben Bempa, but for this session, you can call me Ben the Baptizer. Because I'm baptizing the others into the issue of equity. And I believe by the end of the day, we will all go home with the flag of equity seeking the interests of BIPOC youth, and especially for Black communities. Yeah, the presentation is quite simple but very insightful. The fact that this morning we have all been introduced to the issue about equitable programs, cultural sensitivity, colonial oppression, racialization, intergenerational, and such intersectional issues. But most in particular for Black youth, it is for the fact that their unique characteristics make them very vulnerable and prone. And as we can also see from the subsequent slide, you notice the disproportionate nature of the statistics that Black youth face in terms of homelessness. In much particular, this is insightful for the fact that we touches on three or four core programs that have been holistically implemented by Rest Center, focusing on what they touch as the Bridge of Hope, Bare Necessities, Hero, and Spell Development. These are holistic in nature because the issue of BIPOC youth and especially Black youth cannot be tackled in an isolated way or looking at only one side of the spectrum. And 360-degree case also focus on culturally tailored support that are Afro-centric based and in the design of model housing for Black youth. At the end of the day, we believe, as I mentioned, you will be able to take home how to drive equity in your various works. And also, we also want to make this very conversational to also learn more from you. Yeah, not to bother you with a lot of statistics in our presentation, but also to highlight the fact that when it comes to the issue of homelessness, for the two presentation that is from 360-degree Gates and that of Rest Center, which are situated differently within Ontario, is the fact that York region has a population over 1.2 million, whereas that of P region where Rest is situated has a population over 1.5 million. And in all this, according to the last PIT, that is point in time count, Rest had about 866 people being experiencing homelessness, whereas that of York region, that where 360-degree Kate is situated, also had over 329 people experiencing homelessness. This might be, I might point out, is that is the, smaller towns that has been made because this was undertaken during the COVID time. But most interesting is the fact that Black youth homelessness in the York region is about 16%, whereas that of the Key region is around 16%, whereas that of the York region is around 14%. And also the disproportionate nature is really epitomized here for the fact that 23.5% of homelessness are represented in the population of York region, for which the Black population is just around 9.5. But when it comes to the issue of homelessness, you see the disproportionate nature of it. And when we talk about the York region has more than 10% of the Black being homelessness, being in a situation like that. And that they represent just 2.5% of the population. So in these two um, areas, you can see the disproportionate nature of homelessness that are being faced. And for LGBTQS plus, for Q region, it's around 7% being homeless, whereas that of York region is 10%. But key here that I want to throw much more light on, for which we all have attested to for the various presentation, is the fact that affordable housing crisis is a big issue that we are all confronted with. And also the proportional Black youth homelessness, as I've mentioned. But most important also is the fact that in the presentations that will be highlighted by Dagmar and Clovis, they will throw much light on the fact that there's the need for equity and culturally focused interventions as we speak in terms of Black youth homelessness. So, Dagmar.
Oops.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. It's really a pleasure to be in front of you. I think I'm left with the task to share with you some of the interventions of rest, and I am the executive director and the one who have been pioneering this work in the region of Peel for the last 8 years. We are Black led, Black focused, and Black serving, the only Black B3 organization in Peel region doing this type of work. I think Ben just highlighted to us that there is a big issue, and it's very alarming that we find that there is a large overrepresentation of Black people in the homelessness sector. So I want to just share with you some of the unique challenges of our population, as you could see here. So we have our client base is made up of approximately 75% who identify as Black and 6% who identify as Indigenous. 77% of our clients are females and 19% are males. 89% of our clients are aged between 18 to 24, with 7% between the ages of 16 to 17. 35% are unemployed, and 41% earn less than $10,000 per annum. And 46% have been unemployed for over 1 year. 45% of our clients are in high school and 42% are in post-secondary education. So this data is very important to us because it also informs our intervention, as we see that youth actually need specific strategies targeted at helping to address their homelessness. So here is Rest Center model. We have a four-pillar approach to addressing homelessness. We tend to work from a very holistic framework in terms of providing support to young people. And those four pillars are shelter, living, healing, and growing. And under the shelter pillar, we have what we call a community host-based model of housing. And it's called a Bridge of Hope program. We do not own a shelter and we do not own a physical building. However, we work with community landlords who have spaces that are available to rent to our young people. And we partner with the community landlords. And while the young people receive a space within those houses, we actually provide extensive wraparound supports, which we believe are very, very necessary to help them to build a capacity to live independently and also to sustain their independent living. Now, I think Ben highlighted the housing crisis, and it's becoming, very, very, very much heart-wrenching for us, especially because of the model that we have and the approach to housing. So when we look at the stats and the youth that we serve, with a large number of them being unemployed, earning less than $10,000 a month, and in the region of Peel, for example, we have rooms that may go for as much as $1,500 a month. And then that's a room with a shared space that has, like, you share the living room, and you share the washroom, and you share the kitchen for as much as $1,500. It really makes young people much more marginalized in the market. So that's why the living pillar is very essential for us. It helps us to provide the young people with dignity. And under this pillar, we provide rental subsidies. Without that, there is no way that the young people are able to have a space to stay. And so we subsidize the cost of rent. We provide food subsidies, understanding that, food insecurity also put young people at risk of losing their house. And many of them may have to make the choice of choosing to eat over paying their rent, and as such puts them vulnerable again to losing their space. And household starter kits, help to provide like basic furniture, and sometimes a bed for a young person who is now entering into a space. We know that healing, that's our third pillar, is very important, because for most of the youth, trauma is involved, and and so they have access to, mental health supports and services through our social workers to help to heal some of the emotional trauma and some of the things that are factors of their homelessness. And the last pillar, it's also very, very critically important to us, and that's the growing pillar. And our flagship program under that is the life program, learning initiative fostering employment. And this is where we build the capacity of the young people to be able to live independently and sustain the independent living. So we have a very robust curriculum, and we do things like home economics, teaching them how to cook. We do financial literacy. We do things like teaching them how to manage utilities, how to keep their space, how to really customize their space, because they're living in a room, and oftentimes the room have to become a home. So how to customize their space to actually meet their needs. We do tenant training education to help them to learn their tenant rights, to advocate for their own selves in the housing market, as well as how to be a good tenant. We do other things with them, such as with our landlords also. We do landlord training as well with the landlords who are working with us in support of our youth. Other than that, we do the employment soft skill training and seek to find placements and job opportunities for our youth. And so you could see here that this is a holistic approach. This is just some of our core programming, all focused on helping us to house the youth, which we think is very critical, and also to build their capacity to live independently. I think we have some stats and some numbers here that just, highlights the fact that the programs has been impactful and successful. And now I want to speak to the cultural sensitivity and why it's important in addressing such a unique population such as Black youth. And I will share a video. This video is somebody who has lived experience. So Maya is a youth who came to our program when she aged out of foster care. And now she is with the agency, and she's doing so much. So she's hosting our podcast, Homelessness in Hiding, Youth Between the Cracks. So you could look for that on Spotify. And she also leads our youth council, and she's a peer support leader at Rest Center. And she wanted to voice the importance of cultural sensitivity. So I want to play this. I don't know if I
Let me try to see.
maybe that's people can help me. I'm not sure.
With the internet, I'm not sure if the internet.
No internet.
It worked. I don't know why. It's the issue of internet happening.
So
Good. What
just bear with me just a brief minute. I don't know if the tech people, the video is really very short and brief. Let's see if we could. Um, sorry. Oh, she said look in the left corner for the play button.
Oh, okay.
We, we cannot get the video. We're trying to get the video.
Yeah. It's internet.
No internet, eh?
Yeah, it's internet here. So before 50%, I would like to see. Okay, I'd like to look at here and see. Please. Let's see. Okay.
Maybe
Yeah, can we share this one? Uh, Why it's not sharing on the screen?
it's playing now, but it's just not on the screen.
Please. No. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Uh-uh.
Oh, wait. Do you, is there some kind of a thing? You can either open it at the Chrome or here now. Okay. I just want to see if there's a split screen here.
Oh,
Okay. The points that they maybe I like the points.
Well, it was an important part of the presentation.
It's not shared.
Okay, I guess what time purpose is this.
Yeah, because I don't know what's going on. It's not my computer.
That's not very nice. You're getting short difference here. Yeah, people there may be connected.
Okay.
If that is profit, that's what they did the last time.
Okay.
So what happened? Somehow the computer got split into two screens, I think,
Okay.
and I can't.
Just for the presentation, but
Yeah,
I'll just
do the
speak to the points.
All right. I said that.
No.
Sorry.
The presentation back.
Yeah, the presentation. I didn't know you needed it. My bad.
Anyway, just stick here.
Yeah, this one. Okay.
Yep, it was there. Yep, there you go.
It's not on the screen.
Oh, so I told you we can't put it on the screen.
No, I'm saying the video, but there's still part of the presentation I could read out
Okay, we're in that.
on the screen. Yes.
Yeah, let me see. Let's see.
Where's the presentation?
It was open. It just
I
has.
know. I want to restart it. Is this the presentation?
No, it was open. It was open.
Where is it open?
Yeah.
Any of this?
You just
Is it this?
no. It was just open.
What's the title? We can.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I think it should be the top one. Over here. Scroll. Yeah, this is it.
Is it showing?
Click OK. It's not showing.
It's a connection.
It's a connection problem. Yeah, it's the internet, I believe.
That's not showing.
Okay.
Okay.
You can follow.
Thank you. Okay.
No, that was in there. We got it.
There we go.
Okay. Yes, I like the place here.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I really intended to show the video, but unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties. So I'll just summarize it for you. So, cultural understanding, rest services are rooted in cultural sensitivity and an awareness of the unique challenges faced by Black youth. This understanding creates a safe space where they feel heard and supported. Representation matters, being a Black led, Black serving, and Black focused organization. Rest reflects the experiences and the aspirations of the very communities it serves. This representation fosters a sense of belonging and trust. Equity and inclusivity. Rest is dedicated to addressing the equity disparities that Black youth often face. And inclusivity and inclusivity. And so when Maya did her video, these were some of the things that she highlighted that was important: the representation, the connection and the belonging, visibility, and efficacy. And now I will call on Clovis. Thank you.
So 360 Kids is, as Ben noted, we are somewhat neighbors to rest in terms of municipalities, very similar in size. The organization, however, is different, as you heard. They're a B3 organization, whereas 360 Kids would be more traditionally called a mainstream organization. So doing this work will look a little bit different. And so if you have questions around that, I think it would be uh, appropriate. But in terms of the work of 360 Kids, it's focused on those four pillars. We've been around for about 35 years. Housing has been a mainstay in terms of our work. And I'll get to that shortly in terms of the different kinds of housing programs that we have. Employment's really important part of our work as well, education. And as we all know, the wraparound supports is critical as we talk about supporting young people. And so in terms of our housing work, we have a program called Night Stop, which works with um, trained hosts in the community. It's an accredited model that we imported from, or I guess exported it from UK, and it works very well, especially in semi-urban, rural areas where there may not be enough infrastructure. But it provides opportunities to train hosts who have spare bedrooms to actually provide housing to young people. We have emergency housing. We have our program, it's like a group home, but it's a residential program for young people ages 15 to 19. We have an anti-human trafficking program as well, transitional apartments for young people for up to a year, and then our transitions program, which is for up to 3 years, where Darwin was talking about some of the subsidies for rent. That's where our program is over a 3-year period. We transition young people from subsidies, decreasing the amount of subsidies over a 3-year period as we get the young people closer to market rent. So with that in mind, when we looked at our data, as noted, York Region is about 2.5% Black. And when you look at the homeless population, it hovers between 10 and 14%. So significant overrepresentation of Black youth. But for years, our work has been really general, if I could use the terminology, but we haven't been as responsive to cultural needs of our population. And so when we started looking more seriously at our work, we recognize the importance of changing and changing that work. That had been premised that when you do mainstream work, that you're actually supporting everybody in an equal way. But we know that with overrepresentation, we know that the data that drives what colonialism has done to groups requires us to think differently, and that's really what the Black Youth Housing program is meant to do, is sort of shake us up as an organization to say we need to do something different for these young people who are overrepresented, and so to do that, so that's the purpose. We wanted to do something different to respond to what we saw as a need. And so an important part of that work is to getting advice, because as a mainstream organization, I've been doing this work for a long time. We got good at doing a lot of things, but we don't really know how to do this work of supporting the Black community. Yes, I am Black, but that doesn't mean a lot, and I won't get into that too much, because when you're trained to do this work in a mainstream organization, you don't you know that you need to do something different, but you need support to be able to do it. And just because, by the way, I am the chief executive officer for 360 Kids. I don't think I introduced myself. So that gives you some context as to why I'm here. I lead the organization, and really, this is very important to me because we know that our young Black youth are overrepresented, and so we need to do something different as an organization. And having been doing this work for many years in a mainstream way, we really saw the importance of bringing the Black community into helping us to do this. And so we created an advisory group, and Dagma and REST is one of the organizations that's represented there, but we also have individuals. We have a number of other Black serving organizations in York Region, and there aren't many, but it was really important to engage them in helping us move this work forward, because this is not, in my mind anyways, a 360 Kids project. It is. We're leading the work, but we really, really wanted it to be embedded in community, because the referrals, the supports are all going to come from the community. And so the advisory group was really meant to help engage that work with community from the get-go. But so there's that external piece, but then there's the internal piece. So how, as an organization, are we actually going to move this work along? Because we're not a Black mandated organization. So you heard Dagma talk about that within her organization. Ours, and maybe similar to many of yours, is not focused on that work. And so we had to do our own staff development to help move this along. And being a Black guy, yes, that was a big part of it. But we have staff who are not there. So we had to do a lot of work, and we're still doing that work. We're doing equity work. We're training our leadership. We're starting with our leadership. We're starting to roll some of that training out to our staff. But part of that, getting to that place where we can actually run a Black housing program, really requires the entire organization to get on board, to understand the why, looking at our numbers, and also looking at how to do that. And so sometimes when you think about, well, why do we need to be that tailored? Don't we treat everybody in the same way and equitably? Isn't this going back to segregation? So like all of those questions you may have, certainly love to chat about it, but getting our staff on board was very critical and important in this work. And one of the, if I could go on to location next, one of the things that we had to look at was, where are we going to situate this? Because within York Region, there aren't like enclaves of Black people, because 2.5% means things are very dispersed. And so we had to think about that. And so we engaged a research consultant. And one of the key pieces, as I wrapped up here, is in terms of the development, we didn't want to just look at the bricks and mortar, but we were actually intentional on looking at developing a model that requires us to hear from the young people, hear from service providers in terms of what should that model look like. It's not just the bricks and mortars, as I said, but there are going to be some additional ways that we've historically ran housing programs. This program, we want it to look different. I'm sure there will be some elements that will be common, but what will that difference look like? And this is where we're at in this work, in engaging community, engaging our young people, and engaging service providers to give us that recommendation. So more to come.
Thank you, Clovis. Yeah, yeah, we just running up with the presentation. I believe what we want to take home from here is the fact that prioritization is quite important. And when prioritizing, we want to see how we prioritize for Black youth, ensuring that there's diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And this must be informed by data. As you can see from Clovis' presentation, that of Dagmar, we are all being informed by data. However, data for Black youth is already, as I may point out, non-existent. virtually what we need to do is to try to look internally within your own routine administrative data and use it to inform what you are doing. But that will become much more targeted and focused. So gathering your own internal data is important. Surveys are also relevant, but the skill as to how you can do it, being a young organization means that you will need support. And the support is needed both from the municipality, from the federal, and from the regional level to be able to scale young organizations to be able to develop, to address issues of equity. Then involvement of youth with lived experience. We've all heard since morning, voice inclusivity. How do we ensure that whatever we do, most of us here, I believe our hairs are almost gray up, but we are doing the work for the youth. How do we make sure that we are reflecting what their needs are really? And this, I think, brings us to the point that also we need to employ staff who also have lived experience and try to also co-opt the youth into co-creation of our development agenda that reflects their ultimate need insofar as homelessness is concerned. So with this, I would say thank you very much. We welcome your questions, but however, we have a bit of questions here to guide our conversation. First, we want to look at what models, based on what we discussed, what Provis presented, do you think is really appealing in terms of addressing youth hopelessness and how it targets especially Black youth. And then you can also share your experience with us in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and as Clovis pointed out, the issue of segregation as we think of targeting one segment of a population. How do we ensure that it's not reflecting issue of segregation, but issue of inclusiveness, diversity, and equity? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. The next presentation is going to be handled by Linda Beniki from the Rural Development Network Canada. It's on indigenizing knowledge gathering and data collection. She has about 20 minutes for that presentation. Thank you.
Let's take this. Let me come a bit closer.
Do we always need tech when the tech guys like?
Yeah,
Simplify us out.
Let's close and then we're going to.
yeah, the mouse is not even showing on the screen. That's what I'm. Yeah.
It's like you did that, not me.
Yeah, the mouse is here, but most really here. Okay, alt control is it. Okay, so escape. Control escape. Escape. It's not. Now it's okay.
Start talking. It's fine. I don't want to. Okay. It's precious time.
Don't worry.
And then we can get caught up when he.
Okay. I believe I'm getting there. Yeah, which one is yours?
Bernanke, the second guy.
The second one. I hope I got your pronunciation.
Yeah, it's fine. You just try right here. It's okay. I can just talk.
Don't worry. Okay.
At least when it.
Yes. Let's go to the beginning.
The mouse, let's press like that. Okay,
It's not on the screen now.
it's not on the screen.
Okay. I think we'll just.
I can just go ahead. I'll just go ahead. Okay. Oh, there we
Okay,
go. Woo, we got it! So I don't know if you heard us, but we were saying we only need tech when tech's not in the room. So every single time. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your patience. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to learn more and share your knowledge with us as we learn together. And thank you so much for that very informative information. My name is Linda Bernicki, and I'm the Director for Indigenous Engagement and Community Development for the Rural Development Network. I'm not Indigenous, but I'm representing a team of Indigenous people from the Rural Development Network who weren't able to come today. And we had internal conversations if it would be appropriate and acceptable if I came and spoke about our Indigenous for Indigenous project. And with them and an elder's blessing, we agreed that it would be okay to come because this information is too important not to share. And, you know, the good thing is the reason why they weren't able to come is because they all have little ones at home. So, and as we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to say that this work is being funded by CMHC and the federal government Reaching Home Community Capacity Program. And so this is just a kind of a quick agenda of what I'm going to go through in the probably like 17 minutes I have now. I wanted to start off with about talking about our team. So Taylor was the original project manager for this initiative, and she's no longer with RDN. She's moved on to different career opportunities. But she saw the importance of this project and decided to stay on as part of our Indigenous Advisory Board. Taylor is a member of the Goodfish Lake First Nation in Alberta, and she resides in Edmonton, Alberta. Tegan is a proud Métis woman who resides in Medicine Hat. Rochelle is a member of the Saddle Lake First Nation community in Alberta and resides in Edmonton, Alberta. And Elder Marie has been with the project since 2023. She's a strong advocate for Indigenous rights, especially pertaining to housing and land, and has provided and continues to provide guidance, knowledge, and wisdom on how to best approach relations with our collaborating nations, as well as the steps taken as we move through each phase of the project. Our Indigenous Advisory Board was formed in early 2023 to act as an additional guidance force to ensure we continually approach this work in a good way. The advisory board provides a diverse perspective in helping shape the project. And the people on the board are either elders, knowledge keepers, and they come from a variety of nations across the country. Justin Huel just joined our team last week. And Justin is a member of the Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Alberta and resides on Cold Lake Cree Nation in Alberta with his wife, who is Danae. Additionally, we are honored to be guided by our work with our Indigenous liaison, Emile, who's a champion male traditional dancer hailing from the East Coast. Emile is a member of the Mi'kmaq peoples of Chapel Island, Bootleneck, and he comes from the Moose Clan of Marshalls. So who are we as an organization? Well, the Rural Development Network is a national nonprofit organization that works with communities that are rural, remote, and Indigenous across the country. We've had a lot of conversation about what rural means, but we're flexible in what that means depending on what the needs are. And as you can see, some of the key things that we do is we provide innovative tools and resources, expertise and capacity, advocacy to amplify the rural voice, and we help with accessing funding. We really understand the unique needs of rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And we get that a lot of services and programs are developed for urban centers, and they don't fit well into the rural and remote communities. A lot of times because there's just not processes or infrastructure in place to be able to do that. So we walk alongside communities to help identify what those needs are and take a look at how we can work with them to come up with some solutions. So the goal is to really create a First Nations-led, informed, and adaptable data collection tool that focuses on the area of houselessness within the First Nations, including those who live off reserve. By undertaking this work, the team hopes to define First Nation-specific definition of houselessness led by partnering nations. So really, what are we looking at? We're looking at the, excuse me, we're looking at the ethics of what guides our work. And our foundation is based on the OCAP principles. So we're really asking questions in appropriate and cultured ways. We're confronting personal biases. We're taking the time to learn and grow together. And we're utilizing feedback given. We're seeking and acquiring blessings from elders and leadership and guidance of how to interact with community members and ongoing feedback and taking that feedback and that learning and implementing it into what we're hearing in community. We're being connected in ways of being, knowing, and doing. We're promoting good relations and engaging with people respectfully. The team has also chosen to incorporate Jesse Thistle's 12 dimensions of Indigenous homelessness, as it provides a detailed description and framework for understanding Indigenous homelessness. It also provides an Indigenous definition of home that centers the feeling of rootness and connection with all and the connection to the land and what that means individually to each person. We recognize that this is only a snapshot of what might represent Indigenous. So during the first phase, of this project, we conducted a literature review and environmental scan to further inform understanding of our First Nations houselessness. Okay, sorry, I didn't do the slides, so I'm getting a little confused when I look at my speaking notes and the slides and what's going on here. So what we found is the key findings included there's a lack of easy to use, accessible, timely, and accurate data. There's misrepresented data. There's limitations of current houselessness data collection methods. And when there is, they do not include the number of First Nation peoples living on reserve. They're not culturally informative or relevant. The differences of defining characteristics of houselessness are variety and and there's no consistency, and there's rigid structures or designs. And so as you can see from the information of lived and community experiences, this has also informed the reasoning to move forward with the development of this data collection tool and continues to inform its development, especially as we engage with members of communities and hear stories of leadership and those with lived experience. My assistant is helping me here today, so that's all. So that's great. So through phase one, we've completed phase one, and through phase one, what we did is we did a lot of relationship building. So we did a lot of relationship building with First Nations. We conducted shared circles in communities. The team created an Indigenous advisory board, and the team established agreed upon data protocols that was blessed by community and by an elder. We're currently in phase two of the project. So we're facilitating training to community champions and partners so they can gather stories and experiences in their own communities, distribute storytelling tools with communities, and gather stories and experiences from communities. One of our current communities that we're working with for First Nations community, in the first week alone, we have received over 600 respondents of the survey. That means either people are really interested in what we're doing, or that's also showing us the need in the community. We're expecting from that community to get approximately 1,500 to 2,000 respondents based on the just the 1 week. So in phase three, what we're going to be doing is we're going to complete the data entry, doing the cleaning and the analysis. We're going to identify key themes from each community. We're going to develop reports for each community and share deliverables. And we're going to build out a toolkit for best practices and mobilization that will be blessed by an elder. We receive community feedback and implement that community feedback into the toolkit. And we will finalize deliverables and submit the information to the funders and share the information with the communities. So what we've really seen is we're based in Alberta. The Indigenous team is based in Alberta. We thought our Indigenous communities were going to be in Alberta. But what you can see from up there is that we have two First Nation communities in BC participating, one in Alberta, one in Nova Scotia, and one in Newfoundland and Labrador. And what has happened is the team has been able to visit 4 of the communities in person and exchange knowledge around topics of homelessness and houselessness, and really working with people with lived experiences, knowledge keepers, elders, chief and council, the different services that may be provided on reserve to really bring people together. And it wasn't like an interview. It was sharing circles. It was about telling stories. It was about sharing stories. It was about listening and hearing and taking those stories and implementing what the team heard to be able to put it into something that is going to be able to be used as a tool to advocate for more secure housing in their communities. This is a photo from the team's trip to partnering nation Hollybu. I hope I said that right. Hollybu First Nation in Newfoundland, where the team met with community members to discuss experiences of the houselessness and to hear what home meant for them. That information has been implemented into the toolkit that they're developing and into the survey that they're developing. To help support the project by storytelling and knowledge gathering phase, our team reached out to our data Indigenous team to collaborate. They were very interested. And they were so interested that we talked to them about if we would be able to kind of like take a look at them and share their information. And so as we go through it, I've been given like the song to sing to finish up here, so I'll try to push through. As you can see on there, they have an app. And the app is really powerful because it's like you can go on yourself from a First Nation community and you can do the survey and you can apply it yourself. Or some of the communities are doing written surveys. And so once the written surveys are done, we have Indigenous staff that are going to do the data input, and then we're going to do the data analysis from that. And the thing with it is that we have the MOUs. The MOUs are signed not with RDN, but the MOUs are signed with the First Nations. We don't own the data. We're just an in-between person to help facilitate that and navigate through the system. And so as you can see on this slide, it's really a lot of different things that our Indigenous data can do. And it's really exciting because they are with the University of Manitoba. And so if you'd like more information from them, we're happy to connect you with our contacts there for further conversation. And as you can see, really our goal is to really build a tool that is long-term that people can use to make a difference in their community. We have short-term and long-term goals, but really the whole goal is to have healthy communities with housing that is available for all on reserve. And so as I finish up, I just want you to take a moment to take a look at this. And I have a question for you all to ponder. And the question is, how can you promote Indigenous data sovereignty in the work that you do? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. The final presentation today is Breaking Broken Systems, how to change systems that are causing homelessness. This is going to be presented by Megan McKenzie. She has about 20 minutes to take that presentation, after which we'll go to the Q&A session where we can all ask questions of any of the presenters, actually. Thank you.
This is Mr. Sloth. We're going to be meeting him in a few minutes. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out and persisting despite the adventures of this afternoon. So my name is Dr. Megan McKenzie, and I'm a researcher out of Brandon, Manitoba, with the Brandon Neighborhood Renewal Corporation. So
Yeah,
that's it. It's up there.
Oh, really?
I can't believe the technology's working. So one of the most wonderful things about the homelessness sector and the agencies that help folks who are living unhoused is that agencies are great at seeing people as human beings. They're really good at seeing when people are in crisis and seeing their needs and dealing with them as individuals, whether it's handing out toques if their heads are cold or helping fill out paperwork. That's one of the gifts that I see in this sector that other sectors are not so good at. But that is also one of the challenges that we are facing as a sector, because our desire is to help the individuals in their immediate need. And sometimes we have a hard time stepping back and looking at the systems that are contributing in the bigger picture, and that it is contributing to the problems that our individual clients are facing. And those systems might be broken, they might be unjust, they might be colonial, but sometimes it's important that we step back and try to figure out, is this an individual person problem? Or is this a bigger systemic problem that we need to address in a really concrete and in-depth way in order to change, both for the individuals we're working with now and also for the generations to come, to set precedent? And so this presentation is going to be looking at, how do we challenge those broken or unjust systems? Can folks hear me? Okay. I think we skipped one slides. So, yeah, the quiet indicators, there we go. So often it's hard to figure, we get so overwhelmed with the crisis around us, especially as the housing crisis gets worse and as the homelessness numbers continue to increase. It's really hard sometimes to even identify, is this a systemic problem? So one of the big indicators for me, and I sound like such a mean old Grinch when I say this, is when I see too much charity going on. So when we live in Canada, that's supposed to have a social safety net, that's supposed to have a universal health care, that's supposed to hold up people's human rights. And so if I see charity being relied upon for those types of things, that you're depending on someone's mood that day to give, to depend on things that should be basic rights in Canada, that's one of my indicators that it's a systemic problem. These are all just examples. There's many things that could be there, could also help us to see that this is a bigger problem that we need to address. Particularly, one of the other things is if I see patterns happening, certain groups of people not getting the same access to rights or to the things they need that another group is getting. So this similar groups of people experiencing the same types of problems again, the same type of complaints happening over and over, or disparity between groups and regions. So here's an example of it. So many of you use the vulnerability index, the VI-SPDAT. This is an adult version 2, question 11. So this is one of the stats we pulled last year out of Brandon, Manitoba. We pulled all the most recent VI-SPDATs we had done and found out that 47% of our folks did not have any source of income, which quickly started to explain how come so many people weren't able to secure housing, and how come people were stealing rotisserie chickens from the superstore to feed people in the park, and all kinds of other problems that were happening that were poverty related. And the other pieces that came along with this is the vast majority were Indigenous. Nearly all were Indigenous. And a large percentage also had some type of disability. So when we start seeing patterns like this, it's no longer someone didn't fill out the form right, someone missed their appointment, someone didn't do what they were supposed to. This is big systemic problems. And so our question became, who is responsible for this? And we had to start working through who is responsible for this. It's the next slide, I think. Yeah. So in French, there's a lovely word, responsable, and we don't have that in English. We have a phrase, the one who is it that is responsible. But that's who you're trying to find, the one who's responsible for it. And in a situation with the no source of income, they should have at least had some type of social assistance. But so we went through, they hadn't worked, so it wasn't EI. They weren't eligible for CPP. They were off reserve, so they weren't eligible for the federal funds to their band. So it came down to what we call employment income assistance. So it's like welfare social assistance from the province. And so it's important, if you have a systemic problem, you need to figure out the right system. There's a lot of just general protesting and complaining that doesn't help if you don't really nail down who's responsible, who can fix this, and what exactly do we expect you to do to fix this, and who is this impacting and how. So you have to figure out what level it's happening at. Is it municipal? Is it at the First Nation band level? Is it provincial or territorial? Is it federal? Is it in some other type of system? And you have to figure out, in the case with this, with the EIA situation, we figured out it was the West region, it was under family services, it was under this particular branch. We figured out the people that was responsible and how the intake process was supposed to work. And we were very clear about the problems that we had, and we were able to distinguish exactly what was going on. And so some of the examples of things that were going on where folks were expected to be at 8:30 in the morning across town at a government building to receive an intake session in order to be eligible. Didn't matter they hadn't slept the night before indoors, that they were hungry, that they didn't have bus tickets, that they had limited adaptive functioning abilities due to brain injuries or other types of disabilities or mobility problems. And then it also didn't matter if they were tired, and then they slept through the presentation. They had to come back again because apparently you had to be conscious to make this presentation count. And we found it actually wasn't actually a policy. It was just the way that they'd always done it. And so trying to work backwards and say, how can we do this differently? And EIA came up with a good solution. They sent folks out into the community, to the local health agency, the community health agency, to the Ask Auntie drop-in program, to the Women's Resource Center. And as they were helping them fill out the application forms, they did the intake presentation with them. So all that barrier was suddenly removed. Now I need a few keen volunteers to be pillars in an unjust or broken system. You just have to stand here and hold my sloth friend. I need between 6 and 7 quickly. Jump on up. Siobhan, I knew you were going to volunteer. I just had this sense. We're short. We need a couple more. Can everybody get sloth up above your head? So one of the key things we need to do is start figuring out what enables these unjust, colonial, or broken systems to persist. And the reality is these systems only persist because everyone lets them. Everyone consents to them. And there's a wonderful study done in 2019 at Harvard saying that if you can mobilize 3.5% of the population, you can make social change. That was the tipping point. And so if you can figure out how to get people to remove their consent, to remove the pillars or the things that allow these unjust systems to persist, then we're able to actually dismantle those systems. And I have seen this work not only in the homeless sector, but in some pretty rough places internationally where hope was not in large amounts, and it still worked. So I'm going to pass out some examples. These are just examples of pillars. I'm sure you've seen them before. No accountability. Do you want to be no accountability? Fantastic. I'm sure we've never had a system that doesn't do their job and no one says anything. How about a lack of awareness about what really is going on the ground? How about political will? Some politics there. How about a lack of imagination or other options? I'm sure we've never met a system that lacked imagination. Oh, here's a good one. You're going to like this one. We've always done it this way, so that's how come we keep doing it this way. Tradition in a bad way. And we have some laws and policies. Who do we have over here? Does everybody have one now? We also have, we don't have the money because we're busy wasting it elsewhere. Incompetency, no one's ever seen a system with incompetency, I'm sure. A bunch of failing upward. Some myths, they don't want our help. Those aren't our clients. That's not our mandate, I'm sure. Those clients seem like they might be too challenging for us. We just like to take the easy ones, thanks. A system with some apathy, a little apathy can hold up a system quite well. Sometimes there's people who benefit from the system being messed up, being broken. And how about this one, silence? And I'm sure that folks can think of many others. But what happens when all of a sudden people start naming who's accountable and saying, you chose to take responsibility and to take this position. So why aren't you doing your job? And what happens when you call them out personally or report them to their manager or file complaints with the ombudsman for delay of service? All of a sudden, that pillar, you can leave now, that pillar will disappear. And what happens when people say, well, we didn't know. We didn't know that was a problem. We didn't know that it didn't work, that we didn't know that was happening. When all of a sudden we take all that wonderful data that is being gathered other places and be able to say to them, well, this is actually what's happening, and do some consciousness raising. And very quickly, the excuse of we didn't know disappears. We had a good one happen with imagination the other actually about a month ago now. There was a also with the social with the welfare system there with the IEA. One of our challenges was that folks who had disabilities had to get their form completed by their doctor, as though they had a doctor or a nurse practitioner in Brandon, Manitoba. And so lo and behold, we had about 300, maybe even closer to 400 who couldn't get their disability forms completed. So in all fairness to Family Services, they did an amazing thing. They made an exception for us. They said, well, first of all, they declined because I gave them this, I found them in their policies, there was supposed to be a medical officer to fill out the forms. And the woman said, well, I'm sure that they can fill out make a few exceptions. And I said, how about 300-400 exceptions? And they said, then they were open to ideas from us. So we had a better imagination. And our suggestion was, well, they're working with all kinds of mental health nurses or community nurses or public health nurses. How about the nurses who already know them fill out the forms until they can get a doctor? And then they even gave in and agreed to let us have even what was it? Some type of what was it? I can't think of the right term for it. Like people who work with mobility stuff to sign off on it as well. So sometimes it's just coming up with solutions. And if you hand people solutions, they're willing to do it often, and you can compensate for their lack of imagination. Political will. Lots of times, folks, the system's held up because of a lack of political will. But it's amazing how quick, a quick phone call to the CBC or some inopportune photographs of people sleeping in the front steps of a vacant building that the government happens to own and won't give us, might all of a sudden shift people's understanding of the harm of not acting. So let's take out the political will. Mr. Sloth, our broken system, who's full of hot air, isn't so stable anymore now, is he? What do we have left here? We have laws and policies and tradition. So laws and policies over time, they sometimes take a little bit more work to change, but it is possible. So even just the example I gave of saying, this is our policy to have them go across town for EIA. Sometimes you just challenge those laws and policies, and you're able to withdraw those. Want to go away? Now all we've got left is tradition. That's just the way we've always done it. And sometimes naming that, saying, well, why do you do it that way? If it's not working for people who need it, why are we doing it that way? And it's the same thing as calling out policies. Why are you doing it that way if it's not working? And very quickly, Mr. Sloth will hit the ground and we'll be able to find new ways of doing things. Okay, so we're not done yet. Thank you to our volunteers, though. If folks want to hang out for a few more minutes, we're just going to talk about some different types of systemic failures and some ideas about how do we address these different types of systemic failures. We can go on to the next one. Thanks so much for running my PowerPoint for me. That's not my strength. So often there's a lack of logic in the flow charts. And I'm sure you've encountered those things where there's either some type of gatekeeping so that people can't actually get into the services that they need, or they have impossible expectations, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, or there's bottlenecks. Sometimes we call that the Kelly effect, where you try to go through a very narrow space that everyone's trying to put through, and occasionally you get a corkscrew stuck in the middle of it and it doesn't work. Or there's convoluted processes. And if we go to the next couple slides, I'll give you a couple examples of those. So one of my favorite things to do with application forms or resources that are handed out to clients is to put them in the free readability things on the internet. So this one's here, just a free one I got online. And we took the Community Living Disability Services is a program for people whose IQ are under 70 and have adaptive functioning difficulties since prior to the age of 18. And as you can see, the consent and application form comes out on the high end of difficult. So unless they're reading Beyond Good and Evil, Frederick Wilhelm Nietzsche in their spare time for fun, they're probably not going to be able to adequately fill out this consent form. But you can get other ones at table grade level or things like that. But it's a wonderful way to look at gatekeeping. The next one. Okay. So when we go to intervene with the broken pieces of the logic of the system, when the system logic doesn't make sense, sometimes it's really important to just provide very explicit details and examples of how it is broken or why it isn't working. And I often go back, and it's very boring and tedious, but so satisfying when you find the right one. You read all of their policies and procedures, and with your red pen, like you're a grade 2 teacher, and circle all of the problems. And then when you bring them up to them, you say, well, actually, it's your section 6.2, 2B says this, and this is why it doesn't work. And usually you have to go out of management or leadership in order to make that policy change. So I was trying to explain to some folks about the problems with one of the systems. So I turned it into a game board, and I tested it on my children. It was not a family fun evening. Nobody won. Everyone fought. And it's all exactly the things that actually happened when we tried to get folks through this system. And so sometimes mapping it out as a chart, or even more fun, put it into a game board and have folks play it themselves. They can play their own game. And people can see the problems with what's happening, that these types of things are happening. Perhaps the intake workers keep smoking in the parking lots and no one can actually get through the intake, or any of the other things that have happened that keep being the bumps in the road for us. Thank you so much. Systems are sometimes built on a foundation of myths, and we see this all the time. We can't do that. That's not our mandate. We only take the easy path. I love that we lack the funds. That's always we're wasting money elsewhere. We've got some good examples of that lately, where we're showing that it's costing them more money to do other things. But they say, well, they don't want our help. I said, the key word is your help. They want everyone else's help, so why don't they want your help? Maybe it's after sitting in a meeting sometime for a while, you think, I can see why they don't want to hang out with you. But it's important to address their help. Or is there things that haven't been taken into consideration? We've been doing some work trying to get folks into personal care homes, some of our elders, and they've been turned down for reasons that are not the reasons for turning down other folks. And so we've done some comparisons where I've said, well, you took my grandfather and his farmer buddies who are white and that have the same issues as our Indigenous elders who are living unhoused. How come you're taking this one group and not this other group? All right, I think we're running out of time, so we'll keep going here. So the foundation of myth, the most important thing is do your research, because nothing makes people squirm like being able to point out a very specific fact and calling them out on it. I had one guy's head turn very bright red, and I thought the pulsating vein in his forehead was going to rupture, because their policies were extremely detrimental for our Indigenous folks. And I explained to him that the policies were detrimental to our Indigenous folks. And he said, oh, no, they're not. You can't call me racist. And I said, well, what do you call it when 96.4% of the people who are most negatively impacted by your policies are Indigenous? So that didn't help. I was ready. I wasn't sure his head was going to explode. We were going to have an aneurysm, what was going to happen, but we eventually changed the policies. So the key thing with this too is that people don't like hearing that their myths are wrong, because they built their entire world, their entire systems, their entire careers, their entire identities, that their systems work. And so you're going to have to put up with some eye rolling and some hostility sometimes. We actually just got an email earlier today that was a little bit bitey from someone who wasn't so pleased with us pointing out some of their errors of their ways. So I think we go to the next one. Yeah. This is the hardest one to address. It's when there's a lovely Irish expression. I studied in Ireland for a while, and they said, you can't get to there from here, you've come from the wrong way. And this is exactly what sometimes happens. One of my friends calls it like the reinventing of colonialism in some of our systems, or doing things that are coming from a really paternalistic view, especially with Indigenous folks, people with disabilities, with elders. Often it's very paternalistic, or failing to incorporate things that would be really helpful for the population, like being trauma informed or perhaps harm reduction approach, or taking it into consideration the identity of folks and folks' culture. We've seen this especially with folks with disabilities, where their priority was being in community and being connected to their community and culture. And the outcome of the program was the exact opposite, where they were being separated from those things that are so key to their desires in life. The next one. So this one is where you have to hit higher. You have to go often into top level leadership, sometimes with politicians, sometimes with top level bureaucrats, depending on what type of system you're working with. It takes persistence and doggedness, and you need to make sure that you've got the grit to do it, and you've got the right supporters and the right people behind you, because you need to have a united front to make these kinds of big changes. But know that these big changes will help not only this group but the next generation as well. And so that's strategizing together and persistently doing consciousness raising, slowly eating away at how you want that system to change and being able to slowly move it, because these systems don't turn on a dime. All right. Oh, and this is the most prevalent one. And I think that we wouldn't have broken systems and we wouldn't have unjust systems if we had a really strong accountability in all systems. And so it is the most prevalent. Sometimes it's the easiest to fix if you call it out in the right way. I am a big believer that always go to the person who's not doing what they're supposed to first, and give them a chance to rectify their bad behavior, but in the nicest way possible. I'm always very pleasant when I approach them the first time. Maybe not so much by the second or third time, because I'm no longer approaching them. I'm approaching their management, or going up the stream to whoever is next, to make sure that those folks are held accountable. And the problem is often if you have someone who's not doing what they're supposed to do, you also have people above them who are not holding them accountable, so they're also not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And there's quite often people try to cover it up and try to cover for each other. But it's just naming it. So I usually start with talking with direct person very nicely, and then writing a very detailed complaint to their management or leadership. Or sometimes when it gets to the point of submitting a formal complaint to the system's complaint procedure or through an ombudsman. I've met with politicians, and then all else fails, hello CBC. Okay, next one. And that is it. So the call that I have for folks is, I would not recommend trying to take on 5 systems at once. We're doing that right now. Don't recommend that. Pick one system, pick one problem, and figure out what is the crux of our problem? What is one thing? What is one system that we can address, and be strategic about it? Having some vague protest sign is not the answer. You need to figure out who is holding up the system, who's allowing this to happen, how am I going to be doing this, and what is that mechanism that's going to pull that power out from under them and force the hand to make sure that system changes and that problem's addressed, and be really creative thinking of how do I want this to look instead. So when they ask you what, sometimes they will. We've had it happen a lot, actually. What do you think? Well, what should we do? Because they don't know what to do. Have several suggestions ready for them. Sometimes I start with the most ridiculous one, just so that they're much more open to the second one. Like that example where they said, well, the medical officer could fill out the forms. I'm like, well, our friend is going to be very busy. And all of a sudden, option 2 sounded a lot better. But just pick one thing, be very strategic, plan it out, map it out like you're on a mission. It's not just vague complaints. And we can make these changes. And like I was saying, I've seen it happen in places where people, they appear powerless, but once they all unite and pull out those pillars one by one, pick them off, those systems change.
Thank you very much, Megan, for that presentation. Now we move on to question and answers. When you have a question, you could just signify it by raising your hand, and then we'll move the mic to you. Questions, please.
Are you able to share your slide? Yes. Follow-up question? What is the biggest barrier, or sorry, most common or frequent barrier that you see, I guess for anyone on the panel, in terms of addressing that system change and holding those pillars? The biggest or most frequent that you see with your clients or patients? What is most frequent or which? Repeat it one more time because I didn't hear it all. The biggest or most frequent barrier that you see with clients or patients?
Any other questions?
I would have to say, for me, that's the way we've always done it. And even if it's unjust, even if it's racist, even if it doesn't work, even if it excludes all kinds of people that are within their mandate, the comfort of being in that line of what's always happened is really hard to break. I think I have to turn it on. It's because our tech guys left. So that doesn't work. So I was just saying that I think I'm supposed to repeat it because the camera people can't hear. It's that we've always done it that way. People get stuck in their patterns, and even if those patterns aren't working for people, even if it's excluding people, even if it's racist, even if it's ineffective, if they've always done it that way, it's really hard to get people to break that pattern. But if you can talk sense to a few people, sometimes the people within the system will start helping. Having worked both within the system and outside the system, I can verify that it can happen.
And for us, our work is youth homelessness. And one of the biggest things that we see as a challenge is addressing the stereotypes and myths around why young people are homeless. And it's a real tough one. And so a lot of our work is around educating them on the real reasons and not the reasons they have in their heads.
Okay.
Hi. Is it on? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. Hi. I'm Jessica from Montreal. I feel like we should see who we are. Thank you very much to all of you. That was all very inspiring, and I'm super jazzed right now and trying to figure out where to even go with everything I've learned from you. I guess my question is, I work very closely with a team of nurses and social workers, specialized educators that do outreach work with populations that are homeless in Montreal. It's a team that's well established. They've been there about 30 years. And so there's a bit of riding on the laurels. And I'm currently just started a tiny little committee to start integrating more of the trauma and violence informed care models and frameworks that come from EQUIP, which is out in BC. I'm sure you've heard of them. And one of the things that comes with that is challenging our own internal biases. And sometimes when those things are brought to the front, it's met with either heavy loads of guilt and the person just feels terrible and it almost paralyzes them, or it's met with resistance because we're challenging how people have seen the world. So we're challenging that myth of how they've perceived a population or perceived the work they do. And my question is, do you have any advice on how to help people or accompany folks to challenge those biases in a way that isn't overwhelmingly a negative experience for them, and accompany them so they can see it as an opportunity for growth and moving forward as a stronger clinician and not just as something that's oh, everything I've done was bad up until now? I hope that makes sense as a question. Does it make sense?
Okay. Is this working now? Okay.
Oh, that was really good.
I've been fortunate to work with some very wise Indigenous aunties that have been the best at doing this because they are gentle but firm and wise, and they just sit and hold space and gently guide while people sort it out. Because sometimes people just need to have accompaniment through the process and working through it. And these women have just been so educational to me because it's not a force, it's a consciousness raising, but it's not a lecture consciousness raising. It's a gentle storytelling, but a very clear storytelling, and a gentle guiding and correcting in the most loving ways, though they're nieces and nephews, or they're their own grandparents that they're guiding. And so I think when I think about approaches that I have seen that have worked really, really well, I would think of these aunties.
And if I could just add a couple of thoughts, because we see it in the work that I was talking about, how we change our approach in terms of how we address this with young people. And one of the things that a few things randomly. One, challenge comfort versus safety, because people conflate the two. Just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not safe. Secondly, address the fact that just because you have got good intentions doesn't mean you're not causing harm. And it's a really difficult place for people. Depersonalizing, helping people depersonalize. And so when we're talking about a traditionally white municipality not serving Black youth well, and suddenly social workers feeling like the whole burden is on them as an individual, and we're just saying, you've got to recognize that you represent ... And so you've got to be conscious. And it's not about you. There is a system at play. There's a colonial system and a whole bunch of other things. So it's not about you, but it can be about you if you become aware and you do nothing, right? So just challenging in the best way possible, but recognize and not exonerate people from feeling uncomfortable, because that is a reality that when you start having these conversations, it is going to be uncomfortable, but it doesn't make it an unsafe space.
Thank you.
Um, hello, Siobhan speaking, Hogan Valley Society. Thank you all for your teachings today. My question is around the Youth Initiatives 360 kids and some of the models that you put forward. Is inside of the models a limitation that it is specific to youth clientele, or is there transferability within adult and potentially adult and senior clientele as well? And if there is that transferability, what has that been investigated? Have others approached you and such?
Oh, so you're making me think. Um, our our work is typically challenging adult systems that you don't put youth into adult systems. And so I generally think more about how do we take the current landscape and make it more youth friendly, as opposed to here's what we're doing with the youth, you can apply it the other way. So no, I haven't really given that much thought. Although, having said that, we do try to find ways to bridge that intergenerational gap. And just as a quick example, we run a food program, a food training program, a culinary program for young people. And one of the things that we're doing with that is actually the youth prepare the food, they're learning about the vocational skills, and then they're going and serving seniors. So using that model, and we've had conversations around, okay, so can we also think about housing arrangements where you model young people connecting with older people, getting that mentorship, and the younger people can help around the facility. Like, we're still thinking about those kinds of things. So it's more of how can you do joint first, as opposed to necessarily mapping what we're doing with young people to a different population, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, just to add to that point that Clovis just made, is the fact that for us as rest centers, even though our focus has been on the youth, many a times we have been approached by other entities and other organizations and individuals as to why are you so interested in youth? Whereas when you take a wider scope of approach, including adults, you are able to even get in more resources than you are targeting just for youth and struggling with resource acquisition to take care. However, I believe data is of essence, and also the fact that we need to be so targeted and ensure that what you have the niche into So in your implementation, what your capacity is able to absorb is of essence here. Don't branch into areas that you don't have the capacity, you don't have the resource, and be attracted and wooed because you feel that there is a sea up there that you can fish. Not all the fish will be edible for you. So you need to be very targeted in your approach. Thank you.
Hi. Hello, Amy Moonshadow from here in Chibuktuk, named by the settlers Halifax. Anyways, do you suppose that all of this could be eradicated if we had a basic income guarantee for all people that live in Turtle Island, Canada, since, from birth to death?
Is it like a comment?
Can you over?
Second.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of basic income, and if folks want to do research on it, right near Brandon, there was a community many years ago who did the basic income stuff, and there was some research that's coming out of that. So I think, especially if it means the most vulnerable folks not having to jump through so many hoops to ensure that they have income, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Thank you. There's a woman.
Basic income's got a booth here at the forum, and so if you want to sign a petition, great, please and thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much to the whole panel for your great insights. I am what's known as an Indigenous African Canadian from Nova Scotia, so an Indigenous African Nova Scotia, which means we were the first African people in this country. Been here since some say 1605, 1604, between 1604 and 1605. Or before, I love it. I'll claim whatever you got. And I often talk about the 40 acres and a mule that we never did get, which means that there should be land available for us for housing that it's never been claimed. So I just touch on a couple of words. Number one is reparations in your work, because we're fighting these battles, and have you incorporated that as a part of what it is that you're doing? Even since I've been here, I'm not happy, and I'm not happy because it's kind of like when we say "Ain't I a woman?" I also say "Ain't I a youth?" in the terms of the experience often of Black, Indigenous, and whatever is not included in the overall discussion, even of housing and homelessness. We have to be like in workshops such as this to really get the issue. So I think that's a concern. I was hoping that we would get some specifics around how it is different working with Black youth, for example. What are some components and how we need to look differently at what's happening with our Black youth or with our Aboriginal youth? We just started a community land trust in one of there's a couple now operating. I think there's four of us now, three, four land trusts. This is really creative and what have you. We're the first, and they're in the Black community. But for example, we held a community meeting in our hometown. We had excellent turnout, but it wasn't you. The parents who had homes and housing and what have you were concerned about their youth and came out to find out what it was all about so they could take it back to the youth. I want to see the youth on the panel. I want to know from their own voice because that's what we complain about when we're talking about our other issues is that people are always speaking for us or saying for us and we're not at the table. So something you talked about change. Something needs to change so that it's those voices so it can help me, for example, in terms of how I can look at housing for Black youth. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, maybe before Clovis coming in, I think that is very interesting comment from you. I believe, yes, we heard a lot about getting the voices of the youth heard. But however, how do we create the incentives for them to partake in our programming? This is very, very, very important, especially for Black people. As we pointed out, the fact that when programs, workshops are called to do a thinking through what is needed for youth in terms of the issue of the community land trust that you mentioned. You get the parents partaking, but the youth themselves not being included in the discussion. Here is the gap. The gap is such that the homeless youth are overwhelmed with the nature of call that we make. How do we incentivize them? How do we create the acknowledgement and the sort of responsibility within them so that they can be able to partake in our programming effectively? And this is where the cultural sensitivity is of utmost importance. Stagma presented a whole lot of characteristics and features that the youth face in terms of income, in terms of education, in terms of even being Black, approaching a landlord who is not Black within our communities. There are stigma attached to it. And this is the fact that we should acknowledge and then build up systems and structures that will be able to implement that. And for I like the institutional and system aspect that was presented, having the pillars removed. But when removing the pillars are not in isolation. How do we approach this holistically so that we are able to put them down in such a way that we don't collapse the youth that we are actually targeting to support? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. We'll take questions from two more individuals, three more individuals, and then we'll call it a day.
Hi, thanks so much for today's presentation. I do agree with what folks were saying here in terms of how we can better engage with youth to see them at the front of the room expressing some of their experiences and want when it comes to youth support when accessing housing or trying to find safe, secure housing. So I just also want to say thank you for your comment and thanks for the presentation that's been happening. I do have a question, and it's mainly towards the representative from 360 Kids. You mentioned that as you were trying to, or as you folks were evolving the program and trying to make programming focused for Black youth, a big portion of your work was trying to make sure that people within your organization were on board, especially because the mandate of your organization is not centered on Black youth. Can you maybe outline what was one of the biggest hurdles or barriers when trying to express with your colleagues the importance of having programming that was centered towards a specific group or centered towards specifically marginalized people, and how you went about that, especially being a person who was Black yourself? Because I also work with an organization that has a mandate that's meant to support women, but also want to find ways to not make it seem like when we're looking for more specific programming that it looks like I'm preaching from my own wants, but in hindsight, I'm more preaching from the wants of community members that I interact with every day, both in work and outside of work.
It's a really good question, and in no particular order. That first issue that you spoke about, that is this about Clovis or is this really about something else? And so the data was most helpful. So we talked about 2.5% Black population in New York region, 10+% who are engaged in our program. So the data had to speak. It's not because I'm Black that we're doing it. Number two, I think one of the other challenges that we had to deal with is that you have to start with leadership, and if the leadership isn't there, it's going to be really difficult for the staff to get on board. So we had to do a lot of work in, I won't say convince the leadership, but help them to understand that even though as an organization have been around for 35 plus years doing this work and really doing well at the work, what we didn't do was explore our data to look at who is actually doing well and is everybody doing well? And so we had to actually then start collecting demographic data, which we had not done before. So we've done good work, but have we been doing good work for everybody? And so we now have to start collecting that data. And through having done this now for about a year, doing that demographic data collection, we started seeing, for instance, in our employment program, we have about 40% of our youth are Black. And it's like, whoa, okay. So we have to start exploring. So using the data is a way that we're helping the staff to recognize that there are some things that the assumptions and myths that we've been working from may not actually be accurate. And so it's not about me, my demographic, but it's about what the data is actually telling us. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Clovis. We'll take one question each from the two individuals.
Oh, now I have to guess what I have to choose one, huh? Okay, so my name is Ronald Sharp. I'm from the Atlantic Equity and Research Alliance, also known as ERA. I will choose ladies first. Megan.
Okay.
Your outline of what to do in regards to how to approach the issues of breaking down systemic barriers was exceptional. I've seen it work in federal, and I've taken that model into the community. What I have noticed, though, is that sometimes you get a character in either one of those that resists with such a passion that they can destroy the work from their position of power. In specifically, since we're talking community, you said at the one point the CBC, which was an excellent strategic move. But when CBCs, and you find the right people in CBC, and this happened in New Brunswick, what they did is the story was phenomenal on newcomers and what they were experiencing. They removed the person that was working on the CBC and sent them to Ontario, changed the story, and made the victims the people who were the newcomers. So it's either, usually you get fight or flight. Sometimes you get the people in power fight. What would be, and this is because we're planning that next stage after that move, what would you suggest as a move? Just from your opinion.
So my specialty is nonviolent social change, but every morning I had breakfast with a military strategist at university because we were the only ones who could not get up bright and early in the morning, and we always ran at the last minute and grabbed breakfast. And I'm sure folks that know me as a nonviolent activist would have a fit thinking of the thought of me saying that this is where I learned a lot of it from. And he was obsessed with the footwear that armies wore and the nutritional calorie intakes and the vitamin intakes of troops and all kinds of details that we had never considered as nonviolent activists and as social change people. But I learned so much from him over that year about mapping out exactly how are we going to get from here to here? Where do we want to go? What exact steps will make that happen? What pitfalls might we have? How can we preemptively prepare for those? Are there certain people or messages we want to make sure we avoid? We want to make sure we do things in the order that is least risky and most respectful if we're going to do it? And who do we need to be involved? Who has the knowledge? Who has the skills? Who has the resources? So, I mean, I try to fit this all into 20 minutes, but so that going to CBC, it has to be a very strategic thing because it is risky. You don't know what the journalist is going to say. So it may not be what you do. That's why I put it down at the end usually, because you have so many other things that you do have control over. And there has been some very powerful people that I have corralled over the years by just closing off their options for bad behavior. And the more people you can have involved in this that are wise and are able to help you, the better. The more data, you're talking lots about the importance of that data piece. The more data you have to back you, and the more carefully you plan and strategize, the better it is, that you take very calculated risks and things in very specific orders for specific reasons. You don't just go out at something any which way. And eventually those people can be tamed, um, or can be exposed for what they have done, or moved along so that they no longer block entire systems or harm large numbers of people. Because there's some we're dealing with right now, and I have said that there's a few people in government right now in specific people in specific departments that I think are actually more dangerous than the serial killers, that are killing our Indigenous women, because they're actually resulting in more deaths, according to my accounts, by inaction, by not doing their jobs. And so it's so incredibly important to figure out exactly where that problem is and exactly how you're going to ensure that somebody who's able to do that job and is willing to do it gets into that position, or that the system changes so that it can't be failed by one rogue actor.
Thank you, Megan. So we'll take the final question for the day and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, I'd also like to reiterate your point that collecting data is important. Sorry. For instance, looking into income assistance rates here in Nova Scotia, they don't have available demographic data, so I'm not able to find which persons are of African descent. And I think that's important, as I've attempted to look further into what may support persons of the Black communities experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And beyond that as well is a recognition that Canada's national housing strategy has a funding stream directed towards persons of African descent. Although there doesn't appear to be any direct funding stream within the homelessness strategy. That's Reaching Home, Canada's national homelessness strategy. To my understanding, there is a funding stream available for Indigenous communities through Reaching Home, although there should also be a funding stream, again, available for the Black communities. And I would just, again, iterate that through the numbers, even here within the Halifax region alone, 12% of persons experiencing homelessness are of African descent, and that's compared to just 4% of the population. So there's a disproportionate amount of persons, again, of African descent, who more or less just need the money to kind of help support them. And that's really what it's about. And so I guess it's not really so much of a question as a comment, but if I could phrase that into a question to this panel, like, what are your thoughts on whether or not Canada should support, again, funding stream through Reaching Home for, in particular, Black communities? Thank you.
I mean, I could speak to. Thank you. I cannot really speak to Reaching Home, but I do agree with you. I think that there should be some prioritization, especially because it looks like it's not just a municipal problem, but the further we go, the more we realize that across provinces and across cities, Black people are definitely overrepresented in the homeless stream. In our particular region, we have been actually doing some advocacy around prioritization. It's not as easy. It's not something that is, so readily acceptable. It does require a lot of persistence and I think greed to continue pressing. But I think it's necessary for us to really elevate our voices, because it's an alarming problem. And you just mentioned just in Halifax, we have that issue in Ottawa, we have that issue in the Greater Toronto area, across different provinces. So therefore, I definitely agree with you.
Thank you very much, Dagmar. With that, we come to the end of today's session. I want to say a big thank you to the presenters, Ben, Dagmar, Clovis, Linda, Megan. Thank you very much indeed. And to the participants, a very big thank you. Just be reminded that there will be a recording of the session. It's going to be available by tomorrow on the conference web-based platform. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.